Victoria stood in what used to be her living room, watching Jessica smile that practice smile she'd perfected during her sorority days at USC. The notary shuffled through documents like he was dealing cards at a casino, while I maintained my composure and said, "Before we proceed, there's something we should discuss at the sheriff's department. They're expecting us." The blood drained from Jessica's face like water from a punctured pool float. If you're reading this, you're probably wondering how a 72-year-old retired teacher ended up in a chess match with her daughter-in-law. Well, this story begins with what I thought would be the happiest day of my life and ends with the most educational. 2 days earlier, I had watched my son Robert marry Jessica in the same chapel where I'd married his father 38 years ago. The ceremony was picture perfect. Jessica looked stunning in her grandmother's vintage dress, and I genuinely believed we might finally build the relationship I'd hoped for. After all, she was carrying my future grandchild and blood is thicker than water, or so I thought. The reception took place at the Riverside Country Club, the same venue where I'd volunteered for countless charity events over the years. I'd contributed $25,000 toward their wedding expenses, money I'd carefully saved from my teacher's pension, Social Security, and the life insurance payout from Robert's father's death. It represented years of careful budgeting, skipping vacations, and driving my reliable Honda Accord instead of buying something newer. "Victoria has been such a tremendous help," Jessica announced to a table of her former Delta Gamma sisters, her voice dripping with practiced gratitude. "She's been staying with us for the past few months, helping us save for the house down payment. Such a devoted mother-in-law." The women smiled politely, but I caught their meaningful glances. I recognized that look, the same one I'd seen countless times in faculty meetings when someone's competence was being quietly questioned. "Poor woman probably can't manage living alone anymore," their eyes seemed to say. What Jessica conveniently omitted was how my help had materialized. 4 months ago, she'd orchestrated a campaign of concern about my safety living alone in my ranch-style home in Pleasantville. "What if you have a medical emergency?" she'd said, tears glistening in her perfectly made-up eyes. "What if something happens and nobody finds you for days?" Before I fully understood what was happening, they'd convinced me to move into their guest bedroom temporarily while we explored safer living arrangements for someone my age. Meanwhile, my $25,000 contribution toward their house down payment had mysteriously transformed from a loan with agreed-upon terms into a generous gift that would be sorted out later when things settle down. In my experience, things that need sorting out later rarely get sorted out at all. "She's practically family already," Jessica continued, and the way she emphasized practically made my chest tighten. After 5 years of Robert dating this woman and 8 months of wedding planning, I was still apparently auditioning for acceptance into my own family. But the real humiliation came during the toasts. Robert stood up, champagne flute in hand, beaming at his new wife. "I want to thank everyone who made this celebration possible," he began, his voice warm with genuine emotion. "My beautiful wife, our families, and especially my mother, who has always been there when we needed her most." Polite applause rippled through the room. Standard wedding speech territory so far. Then Jessica rose, elegant in her designer gown, and the crowd quieted expectantly. "I also want to say something special about Victoria," she said, her smile bright enough to power the crystal chandeliers. "She's been living with us for months now, and I've learned so much about family dedication from her." My heart swelled with unexpected warmth. Perhaps I'd misjudged Jessica's intentions. "She's taught me that true mothers never stop taking care of their children, regardless of age," Jessica continued. "Some mothers, when their sons get married, they step back and give the new wife space to build her own family. But not Victoria. She's shown me that a mother's responsibility never truly ends." The applause became hesitant. Guests weren't sure whether to clap or remain silent. Jessica wasn't finished. Victoria's even helping us financially because that's what real mothers do. They sacrifice everything for their children's happiness. It's truly inspiring to witness such selflessness in action. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room focused on me, and I understood with crystal clarity what had just occurred. Jessica had publicly branded me as a woman who couldn't let go, someone who was still financially supporting her grown son like he was a teenager needing lunch money. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came the following morning when I awoke to find Jessica and a man in an expensive suit sitting at the kitchen table, their kitchen table, as Jessica had begun calling it. "Victoria," Jessica said brightly, as if the previous evening's public humiliation hadn't happened. "This is Mr. Thompson from Prestige Legal Services. We need to discuss some important paperwork." I poured myself coffee, my hands steady despite the growing unease in my stomach. After 4 decades of teaching high school students, I developed finely tuned instincts for recognizing ambush tactics. "What type of paperwork?" I asked. Jessica exchanged a meaningful look with the notary. "Well, Robert and I have been discussing your situation, and we think it's time to make some necessary adjustments. You've been so generous with the house down payment, and we want to ensure you're properly cared for as you continue aging." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "What exactly does that mean?" Mr. Thompson cleared his throat professionally. "Mrs. Richardson, your son and daughter-in-law have arranged placement for you at Golden Years Assisted Living. It's a highly regarded facility with round-the-clock medical care. They've already submitted the deposit." My coffee mug hit the table with a sharp clink. "Without consulting me." "We wanted it to be a surprise," Jessica said, her voice gentle but her eyes calculating. "Robert's been incredibly worried about you living independently, and frankly, Victoria, you've seemed somewhat confused lately." Confused. The word struck like a physical blow. I was 72, not 92, and my mind remained as sharp as it had been during my teaching career. But Jessica had been constructing this narrative for weeks, hadn't she? Subtle comments about my supposed forgetfulness, gentle corrections when my recollections differed from hers, concerned mentions to neighbors about my alleged confusion. "I haven't been confused," I said carefully. "Or are you perhaps confused about the fact that this house has my name on the deed alongside Robert's?" Jessica's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her expression, like storm clouds gathering behind a sunny facade. "Actually, Victoria, that's precisely what we need to address. Robert and I have decided to refinance, and it would be much simpler if the property was solely in our names. Cleaner documentation, you understand." "And my $25,000 down payment contribution?" "Consider it a wedding gift," Jessica replied sweetly. "After all, you want your son to be happy, don't you?" The notary was growing visibly uncomfortable, checking his watch and probably calculating how much longer this family drama would consume. He had no idea he was witnessing highway robbery conducted in broad daylight with legal documentation. "Where is Robert?" I asked. "Shouldn't he participate in this conversation?" "He's at CrossFit," Jessica responded without hesitation. "He finds all this financial discussion stressful, so he asked me to handle the details. You understand. Newlywed adjustment period. Of course." Robert had always avoided confrontation, particularly regarding money matters. When he was 13 and wanted expensive basketball shoes, he'd written me a note instead of asking directly. When he'd been caught cheating on a college exam at 19, he'd had his roommate call with the news. And now at 44, he was still dispatching intermediaries to handle his uncomfortable conversations. "Mrs. Richardson," the notary said gently, "I should inform you that according to these documents, you'd be relinquishing all property claims in exchange for having your assisted living expenses covered for the first 18 months. 18 months. They were purchasing my stake in the house for less than 2 years of nursing home costs." "And after those 18 months?" I inquired. Jessica shrugged delicately. We'll cross that bridge when we reach it. Perhaps you'll have adapted by then. Maybe you'll enjoy the community so much you won't want to leave." The audacity was staggering. They'd orchestrated this entire scenario: the wedding, the touching speech about family loyalty, relocating me into their house to establish dependence, and now the final act of stripping away my assets and independence in one calculated maneuver. But here's what Jessica had failed to consider. Underestimating someone only works if they don't recognize the game being played. "I need time to consider this," I said, rising from the table. Jessica's mask slipped momentarily. "Victoria, Mr. Thompson has other appointments scheduled. It would be much more efficient if we could finalize this today." "I'm sure it would be," I replied. "However, I won't be signing anything today." The notary looked relieved. "Of course, Mrs. Richardson. Take whatever time you need. These are significant decisions." After they departed, I sat alone in the living room I'd helped decorate, staring at walls I'd helped paint in the house I'd helped purchase. Jessica had made one critical error in her master plan. She'd forgotten that I'd been Robert's mother for 44 years, which meant I'd been managing his schemes and evasions since before she was born. I'd learned a few strategies about playing the long game. That afternoon, while Jessica was out getting her post-wedding pedicure refreshed, I did something I hadn't done in months. I thoroughly examined my own financial documents, the papers I'd kept in my fireproof safe, which Jessica had insisted we store somewhere secure in their bedroom closet. Funny how somewhere secure actually meant somewhere Victoria can't access without requesting permission first. I found exactly what I was seeking: the original deed showing both Robert's and my name. The canceled check for $25,000 clearly marked house down payment loan. And most importantly, the power of attorney documents Robert had requested I sign 7 months earlier. Jessica had presented those papers as a sensible precaution. "Just in case something happens to you, Victoria, Robert could help manage your affairs without court intervention. It's quite standard for people in your age bracket." I'd read every word of those documents 4 times before signing. What Jessica didn't know was that I'd also consulted my attorney, who had added a very specific clause making the power of attorney conditional on my mental competency as determined by 2 independent physicians. In other words, if I remained mentally sharp enough to handle my own affairs, the power of attorney was void. Despite what Jessica wanted everyone to believe, I was plenty sharp. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Sorry I missed the meeting this morning. How did the paperwork discussion go?" I stared at that message for several minutes. My son inquiring about signing away my rights and assets via text message, as if I were a business transaction he could delegate to his wife. I typed back, "We'll need to discuss this when you return home." His response arrived immediately. "Actually, I'm staying at Mike's tonight, wedding recovery mode. You know how it is. Jessica can update me tomorrow." Wedding recovery. He'd been married less than 48 hours and was already avoiding coming home, or perhaps avoiding facing what they'd attempted to do to me. That evening, Jessica ordered sushi delivery, and we ate in relative silence. She seemed confident I'd eventually capitulate, that time pressure and her patient manipulation would gradually wear down my resistance. "Victoria," she said as we cleared the plates, "I hope you understand that everything we're doing comes from a place of love. Robert worries constantly about your safety and your future. This arrangement would provide him such peace of mind." "I'm certain it would," I replied. "Golden Years really is exceptional. They offer activities, social hours, even a book club. You develop new friendships, have people your own age to connect with." People my own age. As if I'd somehow become incompatible with the general population by virtue of having lived through the Reagan administration. "Have you personally toured this facility?" I asked. "Absolutely. Robert and I visited last month. The staff is wonderful and the apartments are quite spacious, much more suitable for someone with your requirements." My requirements. There was that phrase again, as if being 72 automatically generated a list of special needs that only Jessica could identify. What exactly are these requirements of mine, Jessica? She looked surprised by the question. Well, senior requirements, medical supervision, social interaction with peers, structured activities, the support services that become necessary as we age. I nodded thoughtfully. And you've determined I need these services based on what specific observations? Victoria, you're approaching 75. Independent living becomes more challenging at your stage of life. We're simply being proactive. Approaching 75. I was 72 years and 4 months, but Jessica had been rounding up for weeks, adding months and years to my age like she was fast-forwarding me toward incompetence. I see, I said. And when precisely did you and Robert decide I was no longer capable of making my own decisions? Jessica's patience was beginning to fray around the edges. We're not saying you're incapable, Victoria. We're saying it's time to be realistic about your limitations. Limitations that coincidentally included the limitation of owning property they wanted to control. That night, I lay awake in the guest bedroom that had once been my temporary solution and was now apparently my final night of freedom. Jessica had made it clear that the Golden Years arrangement would proceed with or without my cooperation. They'd use the power of attorney, claim I was becoming forgetful and unsafe. But Jessica had made her second crucial mistake. She'd assumed that a woman who'd raised a son alone after her husband's death, who'd worked as a high school teacher for 35 years managing teenagers and their parents, who'd survived cancer and built a comfortable retirement from nothing, would be easy to manipulate. Tuesday morning, I rose early and prepared my famous blueberry French toast, the same recipe I'd been making for Robert since he was 6 years old, back when he'd sit at our small breakfast nook in our modest duplex and share his dreams of someday owning a big house. I'd wanted to help him achieve that dream. I'd never imagined he'd use it to imprison me. "This smells incredible," Jessica said, appearing in the kitchen in her silk pajama set, perfectly coordinated even first thing in the morning. "What's the special occasion?" "No occasion, just felt like cooking." She sat down and accepted a plate, cutting her French toast into precise, neat squares. "I hope you've had time to think about our conversation yesterday, Victoria. Mr. Thompson called. He can return this afternoon if you're ready to proceed." "I've definitely been thinking," I said, settling across from her with my own plate. "Excellent. I know it's difficult to release independence, but sometimes the people who love us must make hard choices on our behalf." I took a bite of French toast, savoring the burst of blueberries. "May I ask you something, Jessica?" "Of course." "What made you decide I needed assisted living?" She looked puzzled. "Well, as I mentioned, your age, your safety concerns." "No, I mean specifically. What incident convinced you I wasn't safe living independently?" Jessica paused, her fork suspended midway to her mouth. "It's not about one specific incident, Victoria. It's about overall vulnerability assessment. But there must have been something that triggered this concern. A fall, confusion, forgetting to turn off appliances." "Not exactly, but wandering outside at inappropriate hours, getting disoriented, difficulty managing medications. Victoria, it's not about waiting for catastrophe. It's about prevention." I nodded slowly. "So you cannot identify a single instance where I've demonstrated the cognitive or physical decline that would warrant assisted living?" Jessica was becoming flustered. "It's the overall pattern. The overall pattern of a woman who manages her own finances, maintains her own health, drives safely, cooks meals, and engages in normal social activities. You've been living with me for months because you convinced me my house wasn't safe, but I'd been successfully maintaining that house for 15 years, without incident." Jessica set down her fork, her pleasant morning demeanor cracking. "Victoria, I don't understand why you're making this so complicated. We're trying to help you." Are you? I asked quietly. Or are you trying to help yourselves to my assets? The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the dishwasher's gentle hum. How dare you, Jessica whispered, her face flushing crimson. How dare you accuse us of theft? I'm not accusing anyone of theft. I'm asking a legitimate question. If this arrangement is genuinely about my well-being, why does it coincidentally result in you gaining complete ownership of property I helped purchase? Jessica stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the tile floor. I don't have to listen to this. You're being paranoid and hurtful. Am I? Then let's modify the arrangement. I'll consider assisted living, but the house remains in joint ownership, mine and Robert's. That way you achieve peace of mind about my safety, but I maintain my financial security. That's not... The paperwork is already prepared. Paperwork can be amended. Jessica stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something ugly flicker across her face, something calculating and predatory that made my skin crawl. You know what your problem is, Victoria? She said finally. You can't let go. You can't accept that Robert has a wife now, a real family. You want to keep controlling his life, keeping him financially and emotionally dependent on you. The accusation hit like a physical blow. That's not true, isn't it? You moved in here. You inserted yourself into our marriage. You make him feel guilty every time he tries to build a life separate from you. This isn't about the house, Victoria. This is about you refusing to accept that your role in Robert's life has changed. I felt tears sting my eyes because there was just enough truth in her words to hurt. I had been struggling with Robert's marriage, with feeling displaced and less important. But that didn't mean I deserved to be stripped of my independence and assets. Even if that were true, I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest, it wouldn't justify deception and financial exploitation. Jessica laughed, a sound like shattering crystal. Financial exploitation? You gave us that money freely, Victoria. You moved in here by choice. Nobody forced you to do anything. After you systematically undermined my confidence in my ability to live independently. I what? The comments about my forgetfulness, the suggestions about my safety, the gradual erosion of my autonomy. You've been orchestrating this for months, haven't you? Jessica's face went completely still. For just a moment, her mask slipped entirely, and I saw the cold calculation underneath. That's when I knew for certain this wasn't about my well-being at all. You're being ridiculous, Jessica said, but her voice had lost its honeyed sweetness. Now she sounded like what she really was, a woman whose carefully orchestrated plans were being questioned by someone she'd underestimated. Am I stood and walked to the kitchen drawer where I'd been keeping my important papers. Let's discuss timing, Jessica. I pulled out a small notebook where I'd been tracking something very specific over the past 4 months. March 18th, I read aloud, you mentioned to Robert that I'd left the stove on after making breakfast. Except I'd made toast in the toaster, never used the stove at all. Jessica's face was expressionless, but I could see the mental calculations behind her eyes. March 25th. You told Robert I'd forgotten our lunch plans and made alternative arrangements, except we never had lunch plans. You'd canceled on me that morning. I flipped the page. April 7th. You suggested I was having difficulty following conversations because I'd asked you to repeat something. What I'd actually requested was for you to speak louder because you were mumbling. Victoria, I don't know what you think you're proving. April 22nd. You mentioned to Mrs. Patterson next door that I'd gotten confused about what day it was. I'd asked if it was Tuesday or Wednesday because I'd lost track during my bout with the flu, which you conveniently failed to mention to her. I could see Jessica calculating, trying to determine how much I knew, how much I could prove. You've been building a case against my mental competency for months, I continued. Every minor mistake, every normal senior moment, every instance of being tired or sick, you've been cataloging it all and presenting it as evidence of decline. You're being paranoid. Am I? Then why did you tell the florist that I was getting confused about wedding details when I simply disagreed with your choice of centerpieces? Jessica was quiet now, her jaw clenched. And why, I continued, did you tell Robert I was becoming obsessed with money matters when I asked reasonable questions about how my $25,000 was being spent? Because you were being inappropriate. Inappropriate how? By wanting to know what happened to my own money? Jessica exploded. It's not your money anymore, Victoria. You gave it to us. You can't give someone a gift and then spend the rest of your life questioning how they use it. A gift? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. When exactly did my contribution to your down payment become a gift? Because I have the original documentation right here, and it's very clearly marked as a loan. I pulled out the folder I'd retrieved from their bedroom closet, the one Jessica thought was safely locked away from my allegedly forgetful fingers. A loan that you and Robert agreed to repay within 3 years, with my name remaining on the deed as security until full repayment. Jessica went pale. You weren't supposed to. Robert said he'd explained. Robert said many things, but what matters is what's documented in writing, isn't it? I spread the papers across the kitchen table like a winning poker hand. Loan agreement, deed with joint ownership, power of attorney with mental competency clause, and my personal favorite, the email from Jessica to Robert from 6 weeks ago. Jessica's eyes widened. What email? The one where you wrote, and I quote, "We need to accelerate the Victoria timeline. She's asking too many questions about the money, and I'm concerned she'll complicate the refinancing process." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. You accessed my private messages? You accessed my private life and systematically dismantled it. I'd say we're even. Jessica sat down heavily, her perfect composure finally fracturing. You don't understand the pressure we're under, Victoria. The mortgage payments, the wedding expenses, the baby coming. You needed my money and my property, but not me. That's not true, isn't it? Because your plan was quite clear. Get me to sign away my assets, place me in assisted living, and maintain power of attorney to ensure I couldn't cause any more complications. How long before you'd have convinced Robert I was too senile to warrant visits? How long before I became that forgotten old woman whose family never comes to see her? Jessica was crying now, tears streaming down her perfect face. We weren't trying to hurt you. We needed options. The baby, our future. We needed security. At the cost of my security. You're old, Victoria. You don't need security the way we do. You don't have decades of life ahead of you, children to raise, careers to build. We have expenses you can't comprehend. And there it was, the ugly truth underneath all the manipulation and gaslighting. In Jessica's mind, my remaining years were worth less than their future plans. My needs were negotiable because I didn't have as much time left to need things. You're right, I said quietly. I am getting older. I probably don't have decades remaining. Jessica looked hopeful for the first time that morning. Which is exactly why, I continued, I'm not going to spend whatever time I have left being manipulated and controlled by someone who sees me as disposable. The hope vanished from her face. I'm not signing your papers, Jessica. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And if you and Robert want me out of this house, you'll have to follow proper legal procedures, which means proving I'm actually incompetent, not just inconvenient. That's when Jessica made her third and most critical mistake. She decided to show her true nature. You selfish, bitter old woman, Jessica hissed, all pretense of caring daughter-in-law evaporating like morning fog. Do you have any idea what you're doing to Robert? To our marriage? I'd been waiting for this moment, when her mask would slip completely and reveal who she really was underneath all that practiced sweetness. Enlighten me, I said calmly. You're destroying his happiness. He's torn between his wife and his mother, and you're forcing him to choose. What kind of mother does that to her own son? The kind who taught him that love doesn't come with price tags. Jessica laughed, sharp and bitter. Love? You call this love? You're emotionally blackmailing him, making him feel guilty for having his own life. You've been doing it his entire life, haven't you? I felt something cold settle in my chest. What do you mean? Robert told me everything, Victoria. About how you guilt-tripped him into staying local for college instead of accepting the scholarship to Northwestern. About how you had mysterious health episodes every time he tried to date seriously. About how you made him feel responsible for your loneliness after his father died. Each word was designed to cut deep, and they did. Because like all effective lies, they contained threads of truth twisted into ugly shapes. I supported his college decision, I said quietly. After you cried about how alone you'd be, how hard you'd work to put him through school, and wouldn't it be wonderful if he stayed close enough to visit regularly? Had I said those things? Maybe. I'd been lonely, terrified about facing empty nest syndrome and widowhood simultaneously, but I'd never tried to control his choices. And the health episodes, Jessica continued, sensing weakness. The chest pains when he started getting serious with Jennifer in college. The dizzy spells when he was planning to move to Denver with Sarah. My mouth went dry. Those health issues had been real, stress-induced, but real. The doctor had confirmed it. But the timing. You've been manipulating him for years, Victoria, making yourself the center of his world by playing the victim, and now you're doing it again. I'm not... Yes, you are. You're making him choose between his mother and his pregnant wife. You're forcing him to pick between your comfort and his family's future. What kind of person does that? The accusations hit like physical blows because there was enough truth in them to sting. Had I been too dependent on Robert over the years? Had I unconsciously guilt-tripped him into staying close? But even if I had, it didn't justify what they were doing now. Even if everything you just said is true, I managed, it doesn't give you the right to defraud me. Defraud? Jessica's voice rose to a near shriek. We're trying to take care of you. We're trying to ensure you have a safe place to live and medical care when you need it. By stealing my assets and warehousing me in a facility I never chose. By making sure you don't end up alone and helpless with no one to care for you, I'd rather be alone than be with people who see me as a burden to be managed. That's when Jessica showed me exactly how much venom she'd been containing. Fine, she said, her voice deadly calm. You want to play hardball, Victoria? Let's play hardball. You have 24 hours to reconsider your position. Or what? Or I tell Robert about the pills. My blood turned to ice. What pills? Jessica smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen on a human face. The OxyContin I found in your purse, the prescription that isn't yours, the medication you've been hiding from us. I stared at her, understanding dawning like a terrible sunrise. Those were Margaret Chen's pills. She'd asked me to pick up her prescription because she couldn't leave work. I was supposed to drop them off that afternoon. Can you prove that? Margaret Chen, who moved to Florida last month? That Margaret Chen? The room spun slightly. Margaret had moved, yes, but she'd asked me to collect her prescription as a favor before relocating, to save her a final pharmacy trip. The pills were still in my purse because I'd forgotten to give them to her before she left. You're going to claim I'm abusing prescription medication that isn't mine. I'm going to express concern about your judgment and potential substance abuse issues, combined with your recent paranoid accusations about financial exploitation, your documented confusion and memory problems, and your increasingly erratic behavior. She let the threat hang in the air. Robert will have no choice but to pursue legal guardianship for your own protection. I sat down heavily, the full scope of her manipulation finally becoming clear. She hadn't just been building a case for assisted living. She'd been constructing a case for complete legal control over my life. You planned this, I whispered. I planned for contingencies, Jessica replied coolly. I hoped you'd be reasonable, but I prepared for the possibility that you'd be difficult. Robert will do whatever it takes to protect his family. And I'm his family now, Victoria. You're just the woman who raised him. The cruelty in that statement took my breath away. Now, Jessica continued, checking her watch, Mr. Thompson will be here at 2 p.m. You can sign the papers voluntarily and move to golden years with dignity, or you can fight it and find yourself declared incompetent by a court. She started toward the kitchen exit, then paused in the doorway. Oh, and Victoria. If you even consider telling Robert your version of this conversation, remember that you're a confused old woman with a drug problem and paranoid delusions. Who do you think he's going to believe? His pregnant wife or his increasingly unstable mother? After she left, I sat alone in the kitchen where I'd made breakfast that morning, as if it were any ordinary day. But everything had changed. Jessica had shown me exactly how trapped I was, how completely she'd planned my destruction. But Jessica had made one final mistake. She'd forgotten that I'd had 44 years to learn about my son's personality, his patterns, his weaknesses, and I'd had those same 44 years to learn about patience, planning, and the art of the long game. At exactly 1:45 p.m., Mr. Thompson arrived with his briefcase and official documents. At exactly 1:46 p.m., Jessica discovered that some games are won before they even begin. Mrs. Richardson, Mr. Thompson said, settling into his chair with professional efficiency, I understand you'd like to proceed with the assisted living arrangements today. I smiled at him the same way I'd been smiling at people who underestimated me for 72 years. Actually, Mr. Thompson, I'd like to discuss something entirely different. Jessica froze halfway through serving him coffee. Victoria, we agreed. We didn't agree to anything, Jessica, but I did spend some time this morning making phone calls. I reached into my purse, the same purse where Jessica thought she'd found evidence of prescription drug abuse, and retrieved a manila folder. Mr. Thompson, are you familiar with elder abuse laws in this state? The notary shifted uncomfortably. That's not really my area of expertise, Mrs. Richardson. Well, allow me to educate you. Financial exploitation of elderly persons is a felony punishable by up to 15 years in prison and full restitution of damages. Jessica's coffee cup rattled against its saucer. Victoria, what are you talking about? I'm talking about systematic fraud, Jessica. I'm talking about a carefully orchestrated scheme to separate me from my assets and independence through psychological manipulation and fraudulent documentation. I opened the folder and spread its contents across the table like a poker hand. I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Mr. Thompson, I'd like you to examine the original loan agreement for the house down payment, the one that clearly states this was money to be repaid, not gifted. I'd also like you to see the deed showing joint ownership, which my daughter-in-law has been attempting to get me to sign away under false pretenses. The notary examined the documents, his professional demeanor becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Mrs. Richardson, these appear to be legitimate financial instruments. They are. And here's the email correspondence between Jessica and Robert discussing how to handle the Victoria problem before I became an obstacle to their refinancing plans. Jessica went white. How did you access our private communications? The same way you've been accessing my medical information, financial records, and personal belongings without permission. The difference is, what I did was legal. I pulled out another document. This is a report from Dr. Sienako. Sarah Chen, my physician for the past 15 years, confirming that I show no signs of cognitive decline, dementia, or any condition that would impair my decision-making capacity. When did you... Jessica started. Yesterday afternoon. While you thought I was taking a nap, I also had a very interesting conversation with Detective Martinez from the Elder Abuse Division of the County Sheriff's Department. Mr. Thompson was packing up his briefcase. Mrs. Richardson, I think perhaps I should leave you to handle this family matter privately. Oh, but Mr. Thompson, you're already involved. You see, knowingly participating in the financial exploitation of an elderly person makes you an accessory to a felony. The man went pale. I was told this was a voluntary arrangement. By whom? Did you speak with me directly about my wishes, or did you take Jessica's word that I wanted to sign away my property rights? Mrs. Henderson, contacted our office and explained that you needed assistance with legal documents due to cognitive issues. Cognitive issues that she documented how, exactly? Jessica finally found her voice. Victoria, you're blowing this completely out of proportion. We were trying to help. Help yourselves, you mean? I turned back to Mr. Thompson. Sir, I'm 72 years old, in excellent health, and fully competent to manage my own affairs. No one has the right to make legal decisions for me without my explicit consent, regardless of what my daughter-in-law has told you about my supposed limitations. The notary was edging toward the door. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'll need to consult with my supervisor about how to proceed. You do that, I said cheerfully. And while you're at it, you might want to check your liability insurance. I imagine it covers mistakes, but fraud is another matter entirely. After he left, Jessica and I sat in silence for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and desperate. Victoria, please. You don't understand the position we're in. The debt, the expenses. I understand perfectly. You bit off more than you could chew, and instead of facing the consequences like adults, you decided to solve your problems by robbing your husband's mother. It wasn't supposed to be robbery. It was supposed to be redistribution. You don't need all that money at your age, and we have decades ahead of us. Children to raise. There it was again. My age as justification for their greed. Jessica was crying now, tears streaming down her face. What do you want from us, Victoria? What will it take for you to just let this go? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I'd helped plant, the fence I'd helped repair, the life I'd helped them build. I want my $25,000 back with interest. I want my name removed from this deed, and I want you both to sign a document acknowledging that you attempted to defraud me. We can't pay you back $25,000. We don't have that kind of money. Then you'll need to figure it out. Sell some of that new furniture you bought with my mortgage payments. Cancel your Tuscany honeymoon. Get second jobs. And if we refuse? I turned back to face her, and I let her see exactly how much steel was underneath my pleasant grandmother exterior. Then I filed charges, and we let a jury decide whether your financial desperation justifies elder abuse. That evening, Robert finally came home. I heard him in the driveway, heard Jessica rushing to meet him at the door, heard the urgent, whispered conversation that followed. 20 minutes later, he knocked on the door of the guest bedroom where I was packing my belongings. Mom, can we talk? I looked up from folding the cardigan I'd bought with my first pension check. Of course, sweetheart, come in. He looked terrible, pale, exhausted, like a man who just discovered his entire life was built on quicksand, which in a way it was. Jessica told me about today, about the accusations you're making. They're not accusations, Robert. They're facts backed up by documentation. He sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. Mom, I need you to understand something. Jessica and we never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me. The question is whether you meant to or whether you just didn't care enough to think about the consequences. That's not fair, isn't it? You let your wife convince you that I was becoming incompetent without bothering to consult my doctor. You planned to put me in assisted living without visiting the facility or asking what I wanted. You were going to strip me of my property rights without even having the courage to be present for the conversation. Robert flinched. The CrossFit thing, I was scared, Mom. I didn't know how to handle it. So you let Jessica handle it instead. She said she'd take care of everything, make it easy for you, make it easy for me to be robbed. It wasn't meant to be robbery. God, Mom, you make it sound like we're criminals. I stopped packing and really looked at my son. At 44, he still had the same face he'd had at 14 when he'd crashed his bike into Mrs. Patterson's fence and tried to convince me it had been an accident. What would you call it, Robert? Taking someone's money under false pretenses? Attempting to have them declared incompetent so you can control their assets? Systematically undermining their confidence and independence? We were trying to protect you. From what? From being alone and vulnerable, from falling and lying there for hours with no one to help, from being taken advantage of by people who don't love you. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The only people who've tried to take advantage of me, Robert, are you and your wife. He put his head in his hands. I don't know how this got so messed up. It got messed up because you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a problem to be solved. That's not true. When was the last time you asked me what I wanted, Robert? Not what Jessica thought I needed, not what you decided was best for me, but what I actually wanted for my own life. He was quiet for a long time. I don't remember. Neither do I, and that's the real tragedy here, isn't it? Somewhere along the way, my feelings and preferences became irrelevant to decisions about my life. Mom, what do you want us to do? Jessica says you want us to pay back the down payment money, but we can't. It's gone. It's tied up in the house. Then sell the house. We can't sell the house. Jessica's pregnant. We need the space, the school district. You need a lot of things, Robert, but none of them are more important than my right to be treated with honesty and respect. He looked up at me with desperate eyes. There has to be another way. Some compromise we can work out. The compromise was supposed to be the original loan agreement. I give you money to help with the down payment. You pay me back over 3 years. But Jessica decided that wasn't good enough. She wanted it all. My money, my property rights, and my independence. She's scared, Mom. We both are. The baby, the expenses, the pressure. And you thought the solution was to make your fear and pressure my problem to solve. Robert was crying now, tears streaming down his face like he was 12 years old again. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix this. I sat down beside him on the bed and took his hand, the way I had 1,000 times when he was growing up, and the world seemed too big and scary. Robert, I love you more than life itself. I always have, and I always will. But love doesn't mean letting people hurt you without consequences. What are you going to do? I'm going to move out tomorrow. I've already arranged a rental apartment across town. You don't have to. Yes, I do. I can't live with people who see me as a burden in a bank account. And the money? I squeezed his hand gently. You have 30 days to come up with a repayment plan. If you can't, we'll let the court sort it out. He nodded miserably. I understand. I hope you do, sweetheart, because this isn't just about money. This is about whether you're going to be the kind of man who stands up for what's right, even when it's difficult. After Robert left, I finished packing my few belongings. Tomorrow, I'd start over again at 72 years old. It wasn't the retirement I'd planned, but it was better than the alternative. And Jessica still didn't know about the phone call I'd made to her mother that afternoon. 3 weeks later, I was settled into my new apartment. A cozy 2-bedroom place with a view of the river and neighbors who remembered what it meant to look out for each other. The building was full of active retirees who played bridge, organized book clubs, and treated each other with the respect that Jessica had found so difficult to manage. I'd heard nothing from Robert or Jessica since moving out. No phone calls, no texts, no attempts to negotiate or apologize. The silence spoke volumes about their priorities, but I wasn't alone in my new life. "Victoria, dear, you have a visitor," called Mrs. Chen from the lobby intercom. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw a woman about my age holding a covered casserole dish. "Mrs. Richardson, I'm Patricia Winters, Jessica's mother." I opened the door, curious about what Jessica's mother could possibly want with me. Patricia Winters was elegant in the way that comes from decades of good breeding and careful attention to appearance, but her eyes were tired, and there was something apologetic in her posture. "Please come in," I said. "Can I offer you some tea?" "That would be lovely. Thank you." We sat in my small living room, the afternoon light streaming through windows that overlooked a garden I was already planning to help tend come spring. "Mrs. Richardson," Patricia began, "I owe you an apology." "Please call me Victoria, and what could you possibly need to apologize for?" "For not raising my daughter better than this?" I set down my teacup, surprised by her directness. "When you called me 3 weeks ago and told me what Jessica had done, my first instinct was to defend her. No mother wants to believe their child is capable of such cruelty." She paused, looking out the window. "But I've known Jessica for 32 years, and if I'm honest, I've seen this pattern before." Patricia sighed deeply. "When Jessica was in college, there was an incident with her roommate's credit cards. Jessica claimed it was a misunderstanding, that she'd borrowed money and intended to pay it back. We believed her, hired a lawyer, made it go away." My chest tightened. There were other incidents? Her first marriage ended when her husband discovered she'd been taking money from his elderly grandfather's checking account. Again, Jessica claimed it was temporary, that she was helping the old man manage his finances. But the bank records told a different story. I stared at Patricia, pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. "Robert doesn't know about this, does he?" "Jessica made me promise never to tell anyone. She said she'd learned her lesson, that she was different now. I wanted to believe her. But now you don't." Patricia reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. "This is $25,000, Victoria. Cash." I stared at the envelope like it was a snake. "I can't take your money, Patricia." "Yes, you can, and you will, because my daughter stole from you, and as her mother, I'm responsible for making it right." "That's not how responsibility works." "In my family, it is. My husband built a successful business by believing that integrity isn't negotiable. I failed to teach that lesson to Jessica, but I won't compound that failure by letting her victims suffer from my mistakes." I felt tears sting my eyes. This is incredibly generous, but what about Robert? What about their house? "Robert will figure it out. He's a good man who made bad choices because he trusted the wrong person. The house situation will resolve itself once Jessica realizes the money isn't coming from you." "What do you mean?" Patricia's smile was sad but knowing. "Jessica married Robert because she thought he came from money. Your nice clothes, your generous gifts, your willingness to help with the down payment. She assumed you were wealthy." "I'm comfortable, but hardly wealthy." "Exactly. And once Jessica realizes there's no inheritance coming, that you're not the golden goose she thought you were, she'll move on to easier targets." The casual way Patricia said this made my blood run cold. "You think she'll leave Robert?" "I think Jessica follows opportunity. If Robert can't provide the lifestyle she wants, she'll find someone who can." I thought about the baby Jessica was carrying, about Robert's broken heart when his marriage fell apart, about the grandchild I might never know. The baby will be better off without a mother who sees people as resources to be exploited. Trust me, Victoria. Some people can change, but Jessica isn't one of them. After Patricia left, I sat with the envelope of money on my kitchen table, feeling like I was holding something much heavier than cash. This money represented Patricia's attempt to balance scales that Jessica had tipped toward cruelty and greed, but it also represented something else. the knowledge that Robert was married to a woman who had made a career out of financial exploitation, and that made my next decision much easier. I picked up the phone and dialed Detective Martinez. "Detective, it's Victoria Richardson. I've reconsidered your suggestion about filing formal charges against my daughter-in-law." The knock on Robert's door came at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, just as Jessica was getting ready for her prenatal appointment. I know this because Detective Martinez called me afterward to let me know how it went. "Mrs. Jessica Henderson, you're under arrest for elder financial abuse, fraud, and attempted coercion. You have the right to remain silent." Apparently, Jessica's first words were, "This is Victoria's fault, isn't it?" Even facing arrest, she couldn't take responsibility for her own choices. Robert called me that afternoon, his voice hollow with shock and betrayal. "Hey, Mom, I need to understand what's happening. Jessica says you had her arrested out of spite." "Robert, your wife tried to steal my life savings and have me declared incompetent so she could control my assets. The arrest isn't spite, it's justice." "But she's pregnant, Mom. She's carrying my child." "I know, sweetheart, and I'm sorry this is happening now, but Jessica made her choices. The lawyer says she could go to prison. That's possible. Elder abuse is a felony. How can you be so calm about destroying our family?" The accusation stung, but I'd been expecting it. "Robert, I didn't destroy your family. Jessica did that when she decided to commit crimes against me. She says she never meant to hurt you, that it was all just a misunderstanding about the loan agreement." What about the emails planning to handle the Victoria problem? What about the systematic campaign to make me seem incompetent? What about threatening to claim I had a drug problem if I didn't cooperate? Silence on the other end of the line. "Robert, your wife is a predator. She's done this before to other elderly people. I'm not her first victim." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you need to ask yourself some hard questions about the woman you married and whether you ever really knew her at all." That evening, Patricia Winters called me. "Victoria, I wanted to thank you for pressing charges. I know it wasn't easy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I couldn't let her do this to someone else's family. The police contacted me today. They're looking into Jessica's past relationships, other potential victims. It seems your case has opened up a much larger investigation." My stomach dropped. How much larger? Jessica's first husband wasn't the only one. There were at least 3 elderly men she dated briefly, all of whom experienced mysterious financial problems during their relationships with her. And there was an incident at the assisted living facility where she worked before meeting Robert. I felt sick. She worked at an assisted living facility? For 8 months. She was terminated for suspected theft from residents' accounts, but charges were never filed due to insufficient evidence. The full scope of Jessica's predatory behavior was becoming clear. She hadn't targeted me because I was Robert's mother. She'd targeted me because I was a vulnerable elderly woman with resources she wanted to control. "Patricia, does Robert know about any of this?" "I told him this afternoon. He's processing. My 44-year-old son was processing the fact that he'd married a woman who made a living exploiting elderly people. How is he handling it?" "About as well as you'd expect. He's devastated, angry, and blaming everyone except Jessica. But the evidence is overwhelming, Victoria. Even Robert can't deny it forever." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the baby Jessica was carrying, about the innocent life that would be born into this chaos. I thought about Robert, whose world was crashing down around him. I thought about all the other victims Jessica had left in her wake, but mostly I thought about the choice I'd faced 3 weeks ago: let Jessica get away with her crimes or fight back and face the consequences. I'd chosen to fight, and while that choice would have ripple effects for years to come, it was the right choice. Because sometimes, when you're dealing with people who see kindness as weakness, the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries with consequences attached. My phone rang at midnight. Robert's name on the caller ID. "Mom? I'm here, sweetheart. I'm sorry." His voice was broken, raw with pain and regret. "I'm so sorry for everything. For not believing you, for not protecting you, for choosing her over you. Robert, you don't have to choose between us. You just have to choose between right and wrong. I think I might lose everything, Mom. The house, my marriage, my family. Maybe. But you'll still have the most important thing. What's that? Your integrity, and the chance to be the kind of man your father would be proud of." He cried then, deep sobs that came from somewhere primal and broken, and I cried with him, for the innocence we'd both lost, for the family we'd thought we were building, for the grandchild who would grow up in the shadow of this betrayal. But beneath the grief, there was something else. Relief. Because for the first time in months, my son was seeing clearly, and that meant there was still hope for us both. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse watching Jessica plead guilty to 3 counts of elder financial abuse. She looked different, smaller somehow, without the designer clothes and professional makeup that had been part of her costume. Robert sat 2 rows behind me with Patricia Winters. He'd filed for divorce 4 weeks after Jessica's arrest, when the full scope of her criminal history became public. The baby, a little girl, had been born healthy despite the stress of her mother's legal troubles. "Your Honor," Jessica's lawyer said, "my client deeply regrets her actions and asks the court's mercy in consideration of her circumstances as a new mother." Judge Martinez looked unimpressed. "Mrs. Henderson, you systematically targeted vulnerable elderly individuals for financial exploitation. Your actions weren't momentary lapses in judgment. They were part of a calculated pattern of abuse spanning several years." Jessica started crying, the same manipulative tears she'd used on Robert and me for months. "Mrs. Henderson, you've pleaded guilty to defrauding Mrs. Victoria Richardson of $25,000, attempting to coerce her into signing away property rights and making false statements about her mental capacity. The court sentences you to 24 months in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation and full restitution to the victim." 24 months. It seemed like such a short time for the damage she'd caused, but it was more than I'd expected. After the sentencing, Robert and I walked outside together into the spring sunshine. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Tired," I admitted, but also free. "I keep thinking about the baby, about Emma growing up knowing her mother is in prison." Emma, they'd named her Emma Victoria Richardson. Robert's attempt to honor me, despite everything that had happened. "Emma will be better off knowing the truth than living with lies," I said, "and she'll have you and Patricia and maybe even me if you'll let me." Robert stopped walking and turned to face me. "Mom, I need you to know something. When Jessica was trying to convince me you were incompetent, there was a part of me that wanted to believe her. The honesty hurt, but I appreciated it. Because it would have been easier than facing the truth about my marriage, about my judgment, about the person I'd chosen to build a life with. Robert. I let her make me see you as a burden instead of a blessing. I let her convince me that loving you was somehow betraying her. I chose comfort over courage, and it nearly cost me everything that actually matters." I took his hand, the same hand I'd held when he was learning to ride a bike, when he'd graduated from high school, when he'd called to tell me he was getting married. "We all make mistakes, sweetheart. The question is what we do with the lessons they teach us. What I learned is that my mother is the strongest, smartest, most resilient woman I've ever known, and I'm sorry it took me this long to remember that." 3 weeks later, Robert brought Emma to visit me in my apartment. She was beautiful. Dark hair like her father, Patricia's elegant features, and eyes that seemed to see everything. "She's perfect," I whispered, holding my granddaughter for the first time. "Mom," Robert said quietly, "I've been thinking about the house." "Oh?" I can't afford the mortgage payments without Jessica's income, and honestly, I don't want to live there anymore. Too many bad memories. I looked up from the baby's face. What will you do? I want to sell it and give you your share of the proceeds. It's not exactly what you're owed, but it's a start. Robert, you don't have to... Yes, I do. Mom, you taught me that family means taking care of each other. For a while there, I forgot what that meant. 6 months after that, Robert and Emma moved into a small house 4 blocks from my apartment. Robert took a weekend job to make ends meet, but he also started coming over for dinner twice a week. We'd sit on my small patio while Emma played on a blanket, and we'd talk about everything except Jessica. Patricia Winters became an unexpected friend, stopping by regularly to help with Emma and share stories about the granddaughter she'd never expected to have such a close relationship with. You know, she said one afternoon as we watched Emma take her first steps across my living room, I think this little one is going to be just fine. Even with everything that's happened, especially because of everything that's happened, she'll grow up knowing that actions have consequences, that integrity matters, and that the women in her family don't back down from bullies. I smiled thinking about the letter I'd written to Emma, one she wouldn't read until she was old enough to understand. In it, I told her the whole story about her mother's choices, about the importance of standing up for yourself, about the difference between love and manipulation. But mostly, I told her about the power that comes from refusing to be anyone's victim, no matter how much they might try to convince you that you're too old, too weak, or too inconvenient to matter. 6 months later, watching Emma take her first steps in my living room, I realized Jessica had actually given me the greatest gift of all. She'd reminded me who I really was, a woman who doesn't back down, who protects what matters, and who proved that being 72 doesn't mean being powerless. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well and teaching the next generation to do the same. Thank you so much for listening. To join our community and never miss a thing, hit that subscribe button. And if this resonated with you, I'd love to read your story in the comments. Let's make every voice heard.